Yo, subscribe for daily boxing videos. Question: what happened to Keith Thurman? Like, that is the serious question that I have for my subscribers, because Keith Thurman has been inactive for about a year. The guy hasn't fought in an entire year. Keith Thurman is literally the most irrelevant unified champion in boxing right now. Like, he is the most irrelevant unified champion in boxing. Not just in the welterweight division, but in the entirety of boxing. I mean, can you imagine if Anthony Joshua went 15 months without defending his unified titles? Everybody will be, shooting up a storm. Everybody will be pissed off. Why hasn't this guy been fighting for a whole year? When it comes to Keith Thurman, I don't know what's up with his, fragile bones or whatever, but it seems that every time I see articles about Keith Thurman, and when people are asking the question, why is this guy so irrelevant, and why hasn't this guy been active, it's always that, well, he's injured. I mean, the guy's injured himself like 3 times in the last 15 months? I just don't understand. Like, why is this guy so irrelevant? Can somebody explain to me why is he so irrelevant? Like, Jeff Horn right now, the weakest champion at welterweight, he's more relevant than Keith Thurman, because he's about to face Terrence Crawford, who was a unified champion at 140. That's a big deal fight for Jeff Horn, because if Jeff Horn manages to beat Terrence Crawford, that is a big monumental moment for him. That is a big game changer. Big opportunity for Jeff Horn. So the weakest guy, and trust me, Jeff Horn is the weakest guy, the weakest champion at welterweight. He's even more relevant than Keith one-time Thurman. I guess Keith Thurman is taking notes from Demetrius Andrade. He's definitely taking notes from Andre Dirrell, because these guys, they be fighting every 2 to 3 years. Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade and Andre Dirrell. I mean, I don't even recognize Keith Thurman anymore. When you look at Keith Thurman, he doesn't even look like a fighter. He doesn't look like a fighter. He looks like a hippie. I mean, he looks like a guy who belongs in a rock band. The guy has, he looks like literally a guy who belongs in a rock band. He doesn't look like a professional fighter. And what sucks about the fact that Keith Thurman is so irrelevant and he fights once every 2 years is when he loses his unified belt at welterweight. Whoever beats him, whether it's Errol Spence Jr., whether it's Terrence Crawford, or whether it's Jeff Horn, whoever ends up beating Keith Thurman, they're not going to give him credit. They're not going to give the guy who beats Keith Thurman credit, because they're going to say the only reason this guy beat Keith Thurman one time is because the dude was inactive and he hadn't fought in 2 years. And that's the sad part. Keith Thurman doesn't realize that because he's inactive and he hasn't fought in 15 months, that's actually doing damage to him, because a boxer's worst enemy is inactivity. If you're a professional fighter and you're fighting at the highest level of boxing, you do not want to be inactive. You do not want to be inactive, because while you're inactive, while you're not fighting, while you're gaining weight, while you're getting rusty, while you're losing your timing, the guys in your division, they're training, they're sparring, they're putting in the work, regardless of the opposition they're fighting, and they're getting sharper. And you know what's going to happen? You're going to end up losing to that guy. I've been saying forever that Errol Spence Jr. will beat Keith Thurman. And the sad part is, when Errol Spence Jr. finally does fight Keith Thurman, which is probably going to happen next year, 2019, when Errol Spence Jr. beats him, because Keith Thurman has been so inactive, they're not going to give him credit. They're going to say the only reason Errol Spence Jr. won is because Keith one-time Thurman was inactive. But the thing is, that's not Errol Spence Jr.'s problem. Errol Spence Jr. is not controlling Keith Thurman's career. It's not Errol Spence Jr.'s fault, or Jeff Horn's fault, or Terrence Crawford's fault that Keith Thurman is an inactive fighter and that he fights once every 2 years. It's not their fault that Keith Thurman has fragile bones, that he, is always getting injuries. That's the sad part about it. I could see it already. I could see this coming from a mile away. When Keith Thurman loses, they're not going to give the guy who beats him credit. They're going to say he was inactive. Again, you can't put that blame on the guy who beats Keith Thurman. That's all down to Keith Thurman. They weren't the ones who injured Keith Thurman. They weren't the ones who forced Keith Thurman not to fight for 15 months. I think Keith Thurman is going to be one of those guys that when he loses, he's going to retire, because Keith Thurman is acting like he is, Floyd Mayweather Jr. The guy acts like, he's a made man when he's not Mayweather. He's not, making multiple millions of dollars, and he's not, an undisputed champion. He needs to be fighting a lot more. Even before this whole, cause people are going to say, oh, it wasn't his fault that he got injured. When he hurt his elbow or he hurt his hand in sparring. But the thing is, he's always been a very inactive fighter, Keith Thurman, because even before this whole 1 year layoff, he was in the year 2016. Like, Keith Thurman has only fought twice since 2015. He fought once in 2017 last year, which was an entire year ago, and he fought once in 2016. Even in 2014, when he fought Julio Diaz, he fought once that year. So Keith Thurman has always been a guy that has been very inactive. I just don't understand why Keith Thurman is an inactive fighter. I mean, look at Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder, say what you want about his oppositions, but he be fighting like 3-4 times a year sometimes. Gennady Golovkin fights 3 times a year. You know what I'm saying? Anthony Joshua fights 2-3 times a year. Most fighters, fight multiple times. Vladimir Klitschko, even when he was at the end of his career, he was fighting at least twice a year. And these guys are older than Keith Thurman. Yeah, Keith Thurman is in his prime and he's very inactive. I just don't understand it. Again, I think he's going to lose eventually because of this inactivity, and they're not going to give the fighter who beats him credit. I could already tell. But that's just boxing for you. He was supposed to fight May against Jesse Vargas, but because of his quote-unquote injury, that fight's been postponed. So who knows when he's going to come back. He's probably going to come back later on in the year. And at that point, he would have been out of the ring for almost 2 years. So it's just ridiculous. I think Keith Thurman is really wasting his talent. He should be fighting instead of taking 2-3 year layoffs. Anyway, guys, I'm out. Subscribe as always.